One thing that stands in the way of truth, for example, is when we often do documentaries, we have full access to speak to anyone we want. No, but in this documentary, we've been very closely watched by the sartorial shooter, Alpha Wolf, picking who we can speak to, you know, monitoring the interview. What is it that you're worried that we're going to find out?
These questions are so low.
This is low. It's low. We let you in. We tried to take care of you, and you're sitting here and just attacking us for 3 hours.
Thank you guys for joining me and talking about your extraordinary reporting on Andrew Tate. There's a lot to talk about. This is a long investigation. You got incredible access and revelations of some really serious allegations. So let's dive right in. Like, what's the 101? Like, for someone who doesn't know who Andrew Tate is, why were you following him for so long, and what did you find out?
Well, Jamie first started looking into Andrew Tate years ago, and since then he's only grown in popularity. So he is a kind of a viral influencer who's known for his sort of self-help style videos, which claim to teach you how to become a wealthy alpha male. But he's become more famous for his kind of viral misogynistic diatribes where he talks about violence against women, that women are men's property and things like that. His videos have been viewed over 13 billion times on TikTok alone.
Billion.
Billion with a B. He, at one point last summer, was more Googled than Kim Kardashian and Donald Trump. So, you know, a lot of adults may not know who he is, but I guarantee that if you don't know who he is, your son does, your nephew does, and they're watching him probably right now on TikTok.
And so what made you want to follow what he was doing?
Yeah, so in the sort of later part of 2019, I DM'd Andrew Tate after a colleague at work actually told me about how a friend of hers brother had become obsessed with this guy called Andrew Tate and was taking pictures dressed like him, doing like set-up shots where he was playing chess. And that just immediately grabbed me, that there was this figure that young men were like emulating in such a direct way. And then when I found him online, obviously he was posting incredibly shockingly misogynistic content, graphic descriptions of violence towards women. And I think what shocked me most about him, because obviously the manosphere had been around for a while at that point, right? These sort of like male influencers. But with Andrew, he was simultaneously the most shocking, but also quickly becoming the most popular. And not only was his community people messaging each other online with messages of support about Andrew Tate, but he had fans who were willing to pay thousands of dollars to meet up in real life and spend time with Andrew Tate and learn from Andrew Tate. And that immediately grabbed me as something that we hadn't necessarily seen before.
So talk me through how you got the access, because he's letting you into kind of his inner sanctum. You witnessed quite a bit, so like must not have been easy to convince him to do that.
Yeah, so I mean, when I first reached out to Andrew, he was still relatively unknown. He had about 50,000 Instagram followers, which when you compare to his profile now is fairly insane. But he, I think, as you'll see in our film, has to an extent perhaps always been interested in becoming famous. He was on 2 reality TV shows as a young man, and then seemed to sort of court the tabloid press in the UK for coverage about his webcam business that he was running at the time. So when I first reached out to him, he was actually pretty receptive to Vice coming to cover him. He has, I believe, potentially a bit of an ego that wanted him to have that coverage, but he sort of invited us in cautiously with, you can have an interview, you can come into our sort of house, you can meet Tristan, but that's it. And I sort of spent the next like year and a half just speaking to him, staying in touch regularly. Throughout that period, I managed to get access to his war room and his inner circle. And he was cautious about letting us in, but for some reason, keen for us to be there.
Yeah, and like when he's letting you in, you can see in the film some of his associates being like, what are you doing? Like letting these guys into our place. What did it feel like to be in there? Because it is quite odd. They're women sort of serving you, they're men on computers doing things. Like you played chess with him.
Yeah. I mean, we basically were allowed into his lair, and as you said, to meet his inner circle. It was actually kind of scary because they, as you said, all hated us being there. His brother was furious that we were there, kept saying this is going to be a hit piece. The other members of Inner Circle really disagreed with us being there.
All right, let's be nice to our Vice. Let me be nice to him before he does a hit piece.
This is definitely a hit piece. I've warned my brother that this is a setup, and this is what everyone...
I don't care. I'm uninterested. I've clearly conquered the internet. I'm clearly unstoppable. I'm like the Borg.
You've invited the liberal news media to come
They
talk
can all come.
I think he understood something about publicity, and he had an idea that all publicity is good publicity. No matter if you shock people, offend people, whatever, it helps you to become more viral and ultimately helps you to sell more courses and achieve your goals of you know, becoming wealthy. But I think what he didn't account for was that this is the kind of publicity that may not be so good. One of the scariest moments that happened was I interviewed him when we were playing chess, and I asked him some kind of difficult questions about his misogynistic views. And then later that day, he said, oh, do you want to come to the fight gym and just film me sparring a professional UFC fighter? It might be some good footage for your documentary. I said, yes. When I got there, he said, put some gloves on, you're fighting. And I'd never boxed or done anything like that before. Within seconds, Andrew Tate was punching me in the face. And he was like, yeah, 10 more rounds, let's go. You know, you're in this for a while. And I sort of was like, can I fight someone my own size? And he said, yeah, okay, this guy. And he pulled over this guy who was my own height, but like, you know, twice the size of me in terms of muscle. And he just like wailed on me. I felt like I was gonna pass out.
Jamie, you must have been kind of worried at that point.
Yeah, there's a point where I had to jump in because
Hey, I nigga got
I
balls,
was having
though,
explicit
bruh.
conversations with them before.
Buddy
and,
has some
you know,
balls,
this guy
so
doesn't know how to
respect to
box.
him, bro,
I
for
don't think
doing
you should
that.
be doing this. Like, if you're gonna do it, can it please be sort of training and sparring? Which, to be
Fully
fair to Andrew,
committed.
as much as he punched you in the face, I think he respected to a degree.
Yeah.
But his inner circle, who
Yeah,
were less
bro,
happy
you
with us being
always
there,
respect
I would
someone like
say
that.
took it as a chance to take something out on Matt.
Never boxed before?
No.
Who's got spare gloves? You don't mind spare gloves. There you go.
I appear to have unintentionally walked into a situation where Andrew Tate is gonna train me how to box.
Punch me. Come on. Punch me. Knock out. Fine. Oh, look like you're bleeding already. It's only round one. We've only warmed up. Keep going, bro. We've got 10 more rounds.
No fucking way.
You got 10 more rounds.
Well, and from like a journalistic
Yo,
point
he
of view,
fully
when you're
committed,
in these
bro.
kind of
See, I like
high-pressure,
journalists like that. They
high-access
committed.
scenarios, sometimes
100%.
you do want to
That shit go
ingratiate
hard.
yourself to the person who's offering you.
You really bring
that
the story when
access.
you
And
do
like,
like that.
Yeah, you guys are buddies now. He respects you, so to speak, because you got punched in the face.
Exactly, yeah. We were only able to get the level of access and do the level of interviews with him that we were able to do by gaining their respect by kind of going through the War Room initiation. The War Room is the secret society that he runs out of Romania where you pay $5,000 to learn to be his version of a real man. So yeah, we did do that, and that's how we got the
Look
access.
how this dude's sitting.
You
nigga.
see Tate kind of get happy to see that you're, you know, getting in with into the octagon itself to like actually fight. And at times I was nervous for you, right, as I'm watching it, because I know that you can get seriously injured doing this kind of stuff.
He
And then at other
committed.
times I thought to myself,
Respect,
like,
bruh.
how else are you going to do this? Are you going to say no and I don't want to fight? Like, you kind of, it was a, you know, you're on the ride. You were on the Andrew Tate ride when you were in there, and it was just wild to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did it hurt?
It did hurt. Yeah, I mean, I kind of cracked my rib. I was like, couldn't really walk properly for a bit afterwards. And I lasted like kind of longer than I thought. Then after a while, he was like punching me and kicking me, and I was like, oh, I'd quite like this to stop. So I sort of kind of pretended to tackle him, but really just went in and sort of like hugged him and was like, and then he just threw me on the ground, sat on me and started punching me in the face. And that was the end.
In a sense, it is a little funny, but it's really serious. I mean, in the fights that you saw, like someone got sent to the hospital, and it
Damn,
kind of
they got
demonstrates how
knocked out.
much people are willing to like go to the line for this guy's approval or to like buy into his concept of manliness, which is like, you got to fight each other.
Let me tell y'all something, bro. Do you guys see that hand? You see his hand compared to everybody else's hand? You see this symbol right here, bro? You see this? There's multiple different ones. They're for different points because your fingers are like antennas. When you connect certain antennas with different antennas, it makes a different type of frequency. I just noticed he does it. That's crazy. Okay, so I don't use this one. Like this one right here, exactly what he doing. I don't do that one. There's this one. This controls the nervous system. This right here. So you go like this, connect these three antennas together right here, right? Connect these three antennas right here. And then with these, then you connect these other two. If you ever have anxiety, you're nervous, kind of getting out of control, do this and breathe. Deep breaths, bro. Like, it's gonna calm your nervous system down. And it actually do work, bro. This ain't no bullshit, bro. You hear it live from Justin Bless, bro. That shit work. There's multiple different ones, and it's crazy. I just seen this nigga's hand right now. This is my first time seeing him even do it. If you watch Elon Musk do it as well. People get a look and just be like, oh, he's just doing that just to do that. Nah, there's a reason. That one he's doing, I don't know exactly what that one means.
Each other. That's like very retrograde, obviously, but it's very visceral and it's very dangerous on that very specific level. What was it like to see these people who paid $5,000 to be in this kind of like training program go at it?
I mean, for me, it was really quite shocking because it shows you the level to which, like you said, they're so desperate to win his approval. These are people that often hadn't had any fighting experience before. Many of them, some were in good shape, some weren't. Everyone had to go through a medical test before the fights. They were all fit to fight, but they definitely weren't prepared to fight a professional MMA fighter, right? And you would assume that sort of any reasonable-minded person who's given the chance of fighting a professional MMA fighter in Tuesday's notice would say no and not necessarily feel ashamed about their manlyhood in doing so.
But some people did say no, and like that was part of the process too, right? Like kind of shaming shaming those who didn't rise up to
Hell
the Spartan
yeah.
challenge.
They shamed the
so to
hell out
speak.
of that nigga.
Yeah, I think that was like a really interesting part in that roughly 2/3 of the men there that said that were asked to fight said no, and those 2/3 were sort of subject to a period of shaming. So they would be forced to sit facing a wall and write down on a piece of paper all the ways in which they failed to make this decision.
That looks like a young ass nigga right there with the Vans, with the short shorts. From this distance, bro, he like 20 or something, like young, bro, compared to like the other people that's like next to him.
How it's going to affect their life, why they should be more open to opportunities going forward. And they would also have one-on-one sessions with various people in Andrew Tate's inner network that obviously we weren't allowed to be privy to, but you would assume was a sort of continuation of that shaming process that they were told they were being put through.
Kind of breaking people down.
And I think that is sort of a distillation of the insecurity that a lot of men feel that he's prying open and, in my opinion, kind of exploiting. So he presents all these men with the choice. You know, in a few days, you've been paired up with a professional MMA fighter. You can either say yes or no, right? And you need to make your decision. And you can back out at any time, but you've got to make that decision, right? And then all of a sudden, you're confronted with all those questions as men we feel all the time, like, oh, like, am I not tough enough? If I'm not tough enough to do this, why? Am I pathetic? You know, the word pussy gets thrown around a lot. All the things that, you know, we've probably spent our lives feeling insecure about are heightened at that moment. And in that pressure cooker of male insecurity, there's only one person who has all the answers, and that's Andrew Tate. He set himself up as the guy who holds the key to you becoming an alpha, to you know, vanquishing that insecurity and becoming a real man. And so that you can see why a lot of men sort of, that appeals to them. Andrew Tate has obviously said a lot of kind of controversial things online.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
A lot of things are very controversial, but I think the bottom of his message is a very, very positive one. Because if I'm not tough on myself, nobody else will be. Nobody really cares about me if I don't care about me, right? That's what I learned from Andrew Tate.
You know, when you get to
Gotta be
meet
tough on
someone
yourself,
who's
man.
as,
You gotta want more
I guess,
for yourself
like,
than anybody else want for you, bro.
cultish as a leader, sometimes you get some insight into like what their charisma comes from, like how it actually happens. Like in meeting him and spending so much time with him, like did you get a sense of like where does it come from? Like how is he so charismatic? Why is he able to appeal to so many people?
Take
Like,
care of
what would
yourself,
you say
man.
is like
Stay
secret
blessed.
sauce?
I think that it's no secret that
safe, be
men
easy.
have,
I
since time
appreciate it, bro.
immemorial,
Could continue
felt
to grind. Got
insecure
day
about their own
stream tomorrow, so I'm not gonna stay
and
up too late on this
have
stream.
been jealous of other men
These last 2 days, I was up for like 2
appear to be
a.m.
wealthier, appear
This
to be
time
more
I can stay
attractive to
up
women,
too
appear
late.
to be stronger
So I can wake up in
and
time
more
to
able
do
to
the day
fight.
stream.
He basically exacerbates that dilemma and presents himself as this kind of almost caricature of stereotypical masculinity. So as a man, I can understand why if you're feeling insecure, you might want his approval, especially as a young man, a young adolescent boy who's, you know, one of the main target audiences that he appeals to. Of course, it's important to remember that this is a man who's currently in jail under investigation for rape and human trafficking, and who, through our own reporting, we've spoken to women who say that he has either raped or abused them. So, you know, it's certainly, I mean, it goes without saying, it's obviously not the kind of man that you'd think you should want to win the approval of, and yet still, to this day, many people do.
When you wrap it up like that,
Yeah,
it is
it's
sort of like
wild,
there's
bro.
a very dark side to this, and you found much of it through your own reporting. Can you talk about what you found, who you talked to? Because I mean, these are very serious allegations of sexual assault. You were able to obtain material that maybe corroborated that allegedly. So talk to me about what you found, because like it's not only that people get sent to the hospital because they get, you know, hit so badly in his cult, so to speak, alleged cult, but that his actual personal actions themselves, both on a micro level and maybe on a macro level, allegedly, potentially, are extremely damaging.
Yeah, so we spoke to a number of women in our film and in our reporting around the film, mainly based in the UK. And I think what we focused on in our film was the fact that Andrew, despite his constant claims that no women have ever come forward with complaints about him, no women are ever complaining, he's never been accused of a crime in his life, this was something he would regularly say until his recent arrest. We spoke to 3 women who did go to the police in the UK with allegations of rape or physical assault between 2013 and 2015. And as you said, one of those sources had voice notes, text messages that appeared to be Andrew Tate corroborating that he had sexually assaulted her. I mean, for us, it was particularly harrowing to hear that Andrew Tate allegedly had been held in custody for crimes very similar for what he was later accused of in Romania, in the UK, you know, the country where we both live, and yet was never formally charged.
Oh, they live in
How did Andrew
Romania?
Tate respond to these allegations?
He, of course,
I thought they
denied
lived
these
in the
allegations
US,
via
bro.
his lawyer.
Andrew Tate is currently, or at the time of our filming, like in a prison. Is that correct?
Yes.
So like the timing of this is so interesting. as well, because over the holidays, he obviously got into that spat with the climate activist and was seemingly, arrested very shortly thereafter. And the allegations here are human trafficking, right? Which is like it's crazy and it's insane and it's extremely damaging. So like when you were in his compound, did you get the sense that like something weird might be happening here? Again, this is like a spidey sense kind of question, but like
it was honestly more than a spidey sense. It was.
Have I been on a cruise?
He had a
never
course
been on a cruise
on his
before,
website
bro.
called the PhD, or the Pimping Hose degree, which instructed men on how to, shall we
planning to go on
say,
a cruise, bro?
convince women to work for you in the pornographic industry. We directly asked him when we were there. I said, "Have you heard of the term lover boy before?" And he immediately said, "The lover boy method." So he knew what that was, which is when you kind of lure women in with the promise of a romantic relationship or a flashy lifestyle, and then end up making money from them exploitatively in a sex-adjacent industry, such as webcam modeling, which is what the business he ran. That loverboy method is now a key part of the investigation by the Romanian police. Have you heard the term loverboy before?
The Loverboy method.
Romantically involving yourself with a woman and then making money off of her in some sort of sex-adjacent industry.
Firstly, I would call the webcam industry far closer to psychology than sex. The webcam industry has prevented more male suicide than any group of therapists, any action group, any charity ever would, right?
Is that true? How can you measure that?
Well, it's not about measuring, it's about my personal experience.
One of the concerns that people have about that loverboy method is that
let me correct you, because I'm a professional.
is that it's similar
'Cause
to
I'm a
what
professional.
people might consider a form of grooming.
Okay, so I'm a
man.
professional, so I have to change what you just said. I have to at least challenge you on it. Nobody's concerned about anything that happened 10 years ago when a bunch of girls got rich. There's not a single female complaining.
Do you think there's not a single female complaining?
Have you seen one? Tell me.
We asked him about that well before he was arrested, and most people don't realize that.
Funny, bro.
Months before he was arrested.
Wow, I never been on
recently,
one, but I want to go on one. I want to go on one
his compound was
too.
raided by the Romanian police.
But I ain't trying to go
as
on one
part
that's
of
like
that
for one day.
investigation.
I'm
So
trying
the
to go on one
signs
that's like for like
were
4
there
days or
that
something.
something could be happening. When we were touring around his house, he was saying, "Can't take you there, that's classified. Don't go in there, that's classified. If you try and go in there, my security guard will put a gun in your face." It's almost kind of incredible that no investigation, that this didn't happen sooner, given all that.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, like the term hiding in plain sight in terms of his content has never been more relevant, right? This is a man who, as you'll see in the archive, his own material that appears in our film, he's explicitly spoken about exploiting women, holding women against their will, getting women to work for him in the webcam business. These are all things he's said publicly on YouTube. So personally, like Andrew Tate got a lot of coverage in the last year, and there were quite a lot of journalists from other publications who would go out there, interview him, and seemingly make no attempts to verify his claims. And I think that was something we found really, really frustrating. How much, because he did become such a viral individual, right? I feel like a lot of journalists maybe flocked to him to sort of feed off that virality, but they weren't willing to actually do the investigations to see, is there something more sinister behind the scenes here?
Yeah, and there's no excuse for that because the information was out there. You could see his page where he is pimping hosiery online. It's kind of shocking that it took so long for anyone to kind of call him up on these things.
The question of like when you cover someone who's trying to get as much publicity as possible, who says things that are offensive, damaging, potentially even violent. Did you guys ever think about like, gosh, are we giving this guy more of a platform? Should we pull back? Like, should this just be a written article rather than such a well-produced, fully fleshed out, immersive documentary? How did you guys think of that question?
Definitely, I think it's a really important question. I think
Hold on a
that
sec, Groot.
there's two things. First of all, we went there to challenge him, not platform him, and ultimately give a voice for the first time to the women who allege that he abused them. And this ties into the second answer, which is he's already out there, right? Like he's one of the most famous people in the world. His videos are being viewed like, billions of times, literally. It's important to put something out there in the world that hopefully people will see, where they can see Andrew Tate in the context of the women who've made allegations against him. So maybe when they Google Andrew Tate the next time, they won't just see his videos of him being funny or whatever it is that appeals to people about him. They'll see our video and they'll understand the full story. And I think it's really, really important to do that because we need to start challenging him and his views in as loud a way as possible, because a majority of young men in at least the UK and the US will have seen his content.
Again, these are allegations that he denies, but I guess to me, my next question is, what is the reception? Because a lot of this is out there already. As you delineate very clearly in the piece, like he has effectively an army, young influencers themselves who are cutting up his videos, putting them out on various social media platforms, and that it's part of a chain of commerce. Like everyone's kind of making making money from it, him at the top of the pyramid, of course. What has the reaction been to some of these serious allegations from his like army of followers?
There's been a very strong reaction from his followers, I would say, and it sort of ranges between, you know, your typical threats of physical abuse or death threats, all the way to sort of fairly wild conspiracy theories that perhaps I'm a Matrix or FBI agent that's controlling Matt to do a hit piece against Andrew Tate. Like, we've seen some really wild stuff, but I think for me, what's been most interesting is like the vast amount of hate that I'm getting from Andrew Tate followers is essentially calling me a bad journalist, fake news, all of the things that, like, okay.
Really, I mainly get death threats.
Matt gets a lot of death threats, but I think like one thing for me that's particularly shocking is, particularly in the UK, there are a number of female journalists who I've spoken to who've reported on Andrew Tate, and the hate they receive is far more violent, includes violent threats of sexual assault, and these are people that are just reporting on him. They haven't interviewed him, they haven't gone into his compound, they haven't made this film. Like, so I think it's quite revealing as to what his fans think, right?
That's just not cool.
In the fact that I get called a bad journalist, but if a woman writes about him, she's likely to get threats of sexual assault and death.
Yeah, that's not cool
That's
at
been
all.
really telling for me.
I wonder if we
That's
could talk
fucked up,
about
man.
what might be called as the crisis in masculinity. And this particular, I mean, this is like the most famous man on the internet, basically, right? Maybe not the second most famous man on the internet. And he's preaching a breed of misogyny. He is attracting immense amounts of followers. What is he offering that people aren't getting? Like, how do you think that all comes together?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we have to say is that ultimately the main victims here are women rather than men. You know, in a discussion about Andrew Tate and his extremist views, it's ultimately the women who suffer as a result of this. But of course, you know, it's also right to ask, why is this appealing to so many young men? And I think, as I said before, like, we all as men are constantly insecure about our own masculinity. A lot of the pressures that men feel or put on themselves are that they need to be providers, they need to be strong and tough. Whereas in reality, what would probably help a lot of these young men more is to actually show some vulnerability and acceptance of not being like in control and in power, because no one ever is.
Yeah, it's like, it's not
Sometimes,
just like, let's
bro.
go back to the 1950s
Can't always be
style
vulnerable,
misogyny. It's
bro.
like, let's go back to the 1350s.
Women
Yeah,
should be more
exactly.
vulnerable than
Exactly.
men.
It's
Men
worrying
today.
because, you know, if you several years ago at the height of the Me Too movement, if you were to say this man is going to become the most famous person in the world overnight, you would never be able to fathom that happening. It appears that we've had a complete regression for the Me Too movement, and it seems that you know, there's been the opposite of progress.
I guess what's next is almost my question, but I guess we don't know. I mean, the current state, as we're filming it, is that he's in prison or in jail. He's facing very serious charges. But I guess what we've learned from these sorts of extremists, both online, in politics, and otherwise, is that, like,
You got a
their
solid
followers
lawyer
don't just
though,
go
bro.
away. And, you know, it's not like
Most don't.
these ideas, once they spread, just die once the person who espouses it the strongest is either punished or deposed or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's out there. And this is like, young men are exposed to it. So I guess my question is, like, we've opened a door of a new era in misogyny, as sort of you guys dictate. So, you know, where does it go from there?
I mean, it's a really worrying question, because you're right to say that, you know, the movement has to an extent gone beyond Andrew Tate. He has hundreds of thousands of followers, and even if he's in prison, if he is found guilty at the end of this, they're still going to be out there. They're still going to likely view him as a martyr. You know, allegations have come
so
forward
much
time and
content
time
out
again
there,
about
they can
Andrew
always
Tate, but it
replay
doesn't
it,
stop
you feel
his
me?
fans supporting him. So I think,
yeah.
like, the problem of Andrew Tate, it's much bigger than that. It's the problem of misogyny across the whole of the world, throughout society. And Andrew Tate has become a big symbol for that and a big pusher of that message, but he's not the whole thing. And I think it's something we need to be more wary of as a society and as a whole.
Yeah, and I think gender roles are increasingly becoming kind of the main battleground of the far right and the alt-right in the US and in Europe.
And would you describe Tate as like a far-right extremist? Because he's certainly like a misogynistic extremist, but what is the
I don't know what
overlap or
far-right,
Venn
alt-right
diagram
even
with that
is.
kind of stuff?
Well,
The politics, I guess.
What does that
is-
mean?
yeah, there are definitely connections within Tate's war room to members of the alt-right or the far right, if you want to call it that.
I think, yeah, it's worth saying at the start that, like, Andrew has always claimed that he is completely apolitical. He's claimed
Yeah.
that the war room is completely apolitical. It's just about men, nothing to do with politics. But if you look at the kinds of media celebrities that Andrew is associated with regularly from 2019 all the way through to now, you know, the names that crop up the most are Paul Joseph Watson, Alex Jones, Mike Cernovich, Tommy Robinson, who for the US audience is probably the most famous British racist. So he clearly seems to associate with and go on the platforms of people who represent pretty far-right views. So as much as he may claim to not be political, you can sort of take what you want from those associations.
Well, thank you guys for all of this
Association
reporting.
don't mean
Thank
that
you
you're
for
guilty,
putting
though,
yourself
bro.
in a position to get punched in the face.
Yeah, no, I feel like everyone wants to see a vice journalist get punched in the face, so you're welcome.
And I look forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you.
Thank you.